Hey, what's up, guys? We have Juan Ayala here. He wasn't a TV actor, and now he's a TV and movie journalist. So, how you doing today, Juan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
No
Excited to chat.
problem. Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself first? Then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm an actor, entertainment journalist, and fellow podcaster. I host a show called Actors with Issues. I describe it as a sort of a self-help podcast for actors by actors. So I interview folks from TV, film, and Broadway about their careers and lessons learned, and sharing some advice with young artists. And it's funny to be on the guest side of a show rather than hosting. So it's a nice change of pace. But yeah, we've been doing that for about almost 5 years, over 200 episodes. We started very early during the pandemic when, all of my actor friends and I had nothing but time on our hands. So we, just started chatting with them, sort of seeing how they were handling the pandemic, how they were staying creative. And it's been a really cool experience getting to chat with some actors who I have really admired and, seen their work and whatnot. And apart from that, I'm also an actor, as you said. I grew up and went to school in Connecticut, to a small community college out there in Bridgeport, and got my degree in theater. I moved to New York in 2019 and have done a couple TV shows, some commercials and whatnot. And my day job is as an entertainment journalist, and I'm the director of content management for a website called Media Village. It's a nonprofit aimed toward news and industry thought leadership for the media, marketing, and advertising community. And I started with them as a freelance journalist back in 2018. And excuse me. And since then, have launched a podcast for that company, and I'm a member of the Critics' Choice Association as well, and a couple committees there, and get to attend the Critics' Choice Awards through that. Sadly, I can't go this year. It was supposed to be a couple weeks ago, but with the fires and everything, they postponed it, and that new date sadly is no longer open for me. So there's always next year, But that's the many sides of me, sort of a jack of all trades and a master of none, but doing what we can.
Yeah. So, you were gonna go to the SAG Awards. Was that in LA?
It was the Critics' Choice Awards,
Oh, Critics' Choice
and
Awards.
yes,
Sorry.
in LA, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm actually in the LA area, and I wanted to go to the Palm Springs Film Festival, but I didn't.
Mm.
I didn't have tickets. I just wanted to like kind of like go and stalk it, see if I could see any celebrities or whatever. So me and my fiance were over there, and it was like just too crowded. She didn't really want to like go in to
Mm.
anything. Like the whole street was like shut down for that. But I am very interested in. I saw really quickly before I saw like you interviewing like Lewis Pullman.
Mm.
Um, so, I mean, that's a pretty big name. I know his dad's Bill Pullman, and I was like, that's pretty cool. Like that. That's kind of like the type of job that I would want to do. Well, I mean, just podcasting in general, really. But I am very interested in acting and actors, and also
Mm.
actors like with problems, like what your podcast is about.
Yeah.
But first of all, like let's just start with your acting career. Are you still acting, or is that kind of like a have you stopped doing that?
I haven't fully stopped. I do still have an agent and a manager and audition when they come my way. Just the industry has changed quite a bit in the last couple years. Before the pandemic, I got my first TV booking. It was a small role. I played an FBI lab tech on a show called Blind Spot that ran on NBC for about 5 years, and that turned into a recurring role, which was awesome because it was my first ever legit gig, and then that turned to my first recurring role. So I did 4 episodes of that show, including sort of like the big series finale because it we wrapped at the end of 2019, just a few months before COVID. And then during the pandemic, I booked another show. It was very strange doing or going on set, sort of, because I was on set right before COVID and then about 9 months into COVID. So I worked on a show called For Life that was on NBC, on ABC for 2 seasons. And I played a reporter, which is funny because I'm a journalist. So, playing a journalist who wears a suit and whatnot. And but I think vaccines weren't even widely available yet, so it was interesting to you had to get multiple COVID tests before you're like cleared to work. And I was like not seeing anybody. I was wearing a mask everywhere, just like I can't get sick. If I would have been devastated if I finally booked something and then it's like, oh, you tested positive, we can't let you film because you're gonna get someone sick. So, but thankfully, all was well. I filmed it, and it was a very interesting experience. It was a very small set and very small crew, and very small show because of COVID. You know, they were just trying to keep it as safe as possible. But yeah, besides TV, I've booked a few commercials. I did a Sprint commercial a couple years ago, and um, a spot for Blink Fitness. It's a gym chain here on the East Coast, and done a couple small things here and there. But just auditioning when I can, whenever they come my way. It's really slow right now. Usually around this time is when things in TV used to pick up because of pilot season, but pilot season's not what it used to be in terms of how many new shows are being developed. It used to be, there'd be dozens of pilots and new TV shows that networks would, I don't know if you know sort of the pilot episode is pretty much the first episode of any given TV show is called a pilot episode. Um, and during pilot season is when they greenlight all of these different pilots, and they film them, they cast them, they do the whole thing, and then the networks watch them all and decide which ones they want to make into a series and which ones they're not. And but these days you've got shows on all the major networks like NBC, ABC, CBS, all of that. They're just renewing their old shows and keeping those going. So there's not much room for pilots, and streaming services like Netflix and whatnot. They don't really have a traditional pilot format either. They kind of just greenlight a series that's based on a book or based on some other popular IP or something. And they're filming a lot out of the country. They're filming a lot in like the UK and South Africa and Europe and all of that. So there's not much work in the US, sadly. Thankfully in New York at least there's still Broadway and a lot of theater productions for actors to do out here. But yeah, just doing what I can, whatever auditions come my way. I consider myself lucky.
Yeah, I saw that you were in Blind Spot. I looked on the IMDb, and I
Mhm,
mean that's pretty cool that you have like the IMDb, with all your stuff on there. So if anybody
mhm.
wants to check, but like I have a friend who's like a director, cinematographer, I guess, and he doesn't really have much stuff up there. So it's kind of like I don't. It's for some people, it's like you just don't really know what they're doing. But with
Mhm.
IMDb, you can go. I like how you can go and check what everybody's doing. And with Blind Spot and For Life, you're like a regular character. So if I was to go watch the show, like you would be on every episode, right?
I wish. No, I
Or
wish.
not every, but I mean you would be a regular, like a regular character. You said right for Blind Spot.
For Blind Spot, I did 4 episodes total, and they did
Okay.
100. So I did about
Okay.
one per season. I did my first one in season 3. I did one in season 4, and then two in season 5. And had dialogue in those episodes and all of that. And yeah, I missed that show. That was really really good crew and really cool cast. It was a very dramatic, sort of action packed show, but the cast was hilarious. Like it's so funny when very funny people do drama, and then very dramatic people do comedy, sort of doing the
Yeah.
opposite of what they really like.
And then For Life was that the same thing where it was kind of like a smaller role, or
Yeah, for Life, I did 1 episode.
okay.
And actually, it's funny. I technically appeared in two because for the episode after the one that I did, I appeared in the previously on For Life, that section where they do like little recaps. So I appear in the recap,
Oh,
um, which is
that's
funny.
that's good. Because I mean, I
Yeah,
would
I
imagine
got
that.
some extra residuals then, which was nice. I'm not going to complain about that.
Yeah, I would imagine too. The big thing is like for people to like see your face. It's almost
Right.
like almost like advertising. Like every time they see your face, they're like, "Oh, I know who that guy is," you know. And
Right.
then who knows? Maybe like you'll get like a role in the future. Um, yeah. So during COVID, like it seemed like everything, and then there was COVID, and then there was like the writer's strike, and it seemed like
Mhm.
there really wasn't a whole lot of movies and TV coming out. But now it kind of seems like we're back, like with big, Oscar movies like The Brutalist, and
Mhm.
I'm kind of into those types of movies, The Brutalist and Nora. Even I Complete Unknown, Nosferatu. So I'm kind of excited for that. I'm not really, I don't know, I'm not really looking to too for. I can't really think of too much TV that I'm looking forward to, but I know that like Vince Gilligan, the Breaking Bad guy, is coming out with a new show on Apple TV Plus.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. In general, I'm looking forward to like Ari Aster's new, Ari Aster, like the director.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming out with a new movie. So there's a bunch of stuff that I'm looking forward to. Um, but for a while there, it was kind of like, man, like not much is coming out during that like kind of like 3 to 4 year period. But yeah, I'm very interested in like and I also on my YouTube channel, I was doing kind of like I'm kind of interested in what's coming up and like what I'm looking
Mm,
forward to. So I was doing those, and then I was doing like a little bit of like reviews. So I mean, I'm pretty knowledgeable in the
mm,
entertainment film or a field or whatever. But what I am interested in is the behind the scenes, and I kind of feel like it's probably hard to go over the behind the scenes just because the nature of it probably mostly is just like it sounds like almost like regular work, like you're sitting waiting around and then you go to your job or whatever. But are there any I guess like interesting details on working on big sets, or even like have you had any like maybe like encounters with famous people? I know like I said you've interviewed some.
mhm.
What are your thoughts on I guess just like the whole behind the scenes of TV and film? Like for some reason I find it like really interesting, like what's going on, behind the scenes, and even like the hierarchy of actors, kind of from like the D list up to the A list, and like how
Right.
people are kind of like networking, and I guess like what makes it so for people to like be successful in the business. You kind of see what
Yeah.
I'm saying? It's kind of a hard question to ask, and it's long winded, but you kind of see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the behind the scenes, I think that I feel like people don't realize how long it really takes to film stuff. A 1 hour episode of television can take 8 to 10 days, and that's regular broadcast. Like, and, an episode of Law and Order, which has been running for, over 20 years now. It's, I think 25 now. Jesus. Still haven't been on it. I'm trying to book something before that show goes away. It's gonna go away eventually, but hopefully not anytime soon.
Is that like a
Uh,
big one for you that you want to be on, Law and Order?
yeah, it's just like a classic New York show, and sort of just like I feel like it's on the bucket list of like any New York actor. It's like, Law and Order SVU has been on for 25 years. The original Law and Order was revived, so it's on like season 20 now technically, and then there's like three Law and Order shows filming in New York. And it's just a sort of classic thing. Folks watch it, they watch it on streaming. There's marathons of it constantly on like, the Ion channel and what's the other one? USA, those sort of spin-off or smaller cable networks. Um, and yeah, I know like, my whole family would freak out because we watched Law and Order growing up. They'd be like, "Oh my God, you're on it." But yeah, that's definitely on my bucket list.
Yeah, and
As
it
long as I'm
seems like
doing TV here. Yeah.
it seems like a lot of people have been on it, like from like wasn't George Costanza, like Jason Alexander was on it, to
Oh,
like
everybody's been on it.
like
Yeah.
everybody's been on it at one point as like in one episode as like a
Yeah.
either a killer or like somebody involved with the murder or whatever.
Right.
And then I also was running really quick. I heard that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is the longest running show, but it almost sounds like if it's 25 years for Law and Order, wouldn't Law and Order actually be longer or no?
I mean, there's shows that have run longer than Law and Order, but I think It's Always Sunny. I think that is technically the longest running comedy
Okay. Okay.
slash sitcom or live
Yeah.
action because The Simpsons has been on even longer than that. And
Yeah.
it's a comedy, but it's animated. So it's kind of like those categories. And,
Yeah. I knew it
longer than
was
Law and
long.
Order,
Yeah.
you've got you've got General Hospital and these daytime soap operas that have been running for like 60 years.
Yeah.
Um, which is crazy that they're running that long. Good for them though. They've got
Yeah.
their audience. So, um,
Yeah. I was leaving out the comedy part, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but it's, I mean, It's Always Sunny is such a freaking brilliant show, man. It's just how it's such a well-oiled machine that they can sort of all go and just crank out a season, and then the rest of the cast sort of disperses and does other shows because you've got Caitlin Olsen now on High Potential. You've got Rob McClanahy on Mythic Quest on Apple TV Plus. You've got Charlie Day doing movies and animation and all that stuff. Like they're just such a well-oiled machine. Like they know what they're doing. They know what works. They're not trying to, they're very much if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like they're not trying to do anything new or sort of switch up the formula. They're like, no, our fans love this, so we're gonna keep doing this. Um,
Yeah.
that's why they've been on for so long. I feel like so many other shows sort of jump the shark at some point that it's like it becomes too different. People are like, oh, it's not what it used to be, and then they lose fans that way. But yeah,
Yeah. I understand what you're saying, but I have kind of lost interest in It's Always Sunny. I mean, mainly, I don't know. It's a little like I've always loved the show, but like after a certain point, it kind of just grew old for me. It's like
Hmm.
because and it's the same thing with like a lot of shows like The Simpsons. Obviously, isn't as good as it used to be, but um, I mean, I was never really that into The Simpsons. But don't get me wrong, I think that like staying true to what works is a good idea.
Hmm.
But yeah, anyways, I cut you off with the Law and Order part, so you were I think you were just going into like what you wanted to be. Law and Order was one of the ones you wanted to be on, and yeah,
Yeah, and sort of before that, talking about how long it takes to film stuff. So I feel like people
yeah,
generally don't really realize how long it takes in terms of a production thing. Like, you think with a 1 hour show on a TV network, which is really not an hour because with ads it goes down to like 42 minutes, but that still takes like 2 weeks to film. And a 2 hour movie can take anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months to 6 months, depending on the scale of the movie. And I feel like people just don't realize really how much work goes into it. People think that, acting is easy, and sure, the job of acting is an easy one in the sense that if you're filming for 8 hours a day, you're really only acting for maybe 30 minutes from, action to cut. You're not doing that much because there's so many moving parts and so many people on a set. You're waiting a lot um, to go on, or you're changing your costume while they're moving lights and all of that. And just a lot goes into it that I feel like people maybe don't, just sort of the average consumer doesn't quite realize how many moving parts. And that's why the credit lists at the end of everything is so long, because there's so many people who are not seen on camera who make everything work. Um, and in terms of behind the scenes stuff as well, just getting to see how things are made, and coming from an actor's perspective, how much you aren't taught. You're taught how to act, you're taught how to, find a great monologue and develop a character and break down a script and all of that, but you're not taught any of the lingo on set. You're hearing all these, phrases and sort of code words for things, and you're like, what are they talking about? And it's not quite taught in your acting school or your drama program or whatever. You sort of learn it by doing it. Prior to moving to New York, I lived in Connecticut, and I did a lot of work as an extra on a bunch of different shows, and just wherever I could, get hired just to get some onset experience and see how things worked. Because I primarily thought I would be doing theater. I grew up as a musical theater kid, and singing in school and all of that, and never really thought about doing TV and film because I had that misconception that, oh, well, if you want to do TV and film, you got to go to Hollywood. You got to move to LA. New York is where all the theater is. But then you realize, well, there's a ton of shows that film in New York, and whatnot. And so there's sort of that misconception that it's either one or the other. But TV work and film work is sort of spread all over the place. Especially now, there's a lot going on in Chicago, Vancouver, New Mexico, Atlanta. Um, yeah, there's all these sort of smaller markets where a lot of things film, that they do it there because it's cheaper. So they can sort of save on the budget, and they can hire some local actors for the smaller parts and bring in the A-listers to be the leads. But yeah, that's something that I've always found sort of interesting, is how that sort of concept of New York as theater, LA as TV and film, and there's no crossover, but there really is. There's opportunity everywhere, sort of across the board. Except there's not that much theater in LA. I will say that. If you want to do theater, you kind of have to come to New York, or Chicago. Chicago's had a pretty good theater scene too.
like when I look at acting or just movies in general, it seems like fun. Or like I used to be in a band, and like when I'm playing music live, or whether it be live or practicing even or like recording, it was all just kind of like fun for the most part. It's probably like one of my dream jobs to do. I don't even view it as being difficult. And the same thing with movies and TV. But I know that with movies and TV, from what I've heard from people like you and other people, it does take a long time, and like each scene has to be shot perfectly, and they take multiple takes and all that kind of thing. And I also think that like, oh, like anybody could be an actor. You just got to be like, good looking and be able to speak well or whatever, or maybe like charming or whatever. Um, but I mean, obviously, if I was actually first of all, I can't act, and then if I was put into a situation I would imagine that the most nerve-wracking thing about the specific situation might be obviously just the fact that there's eyes on you, and in TV and film there's less eyes than like plays or but like you still have the camera, you still have, you still can't mess up, as if you keep messing
Yeah.
up you're just going to slow the production down, right? So I would imagine that the nerve-wracking part might be like, I got to make sure to nail this and do it like as quickly as possible. I could see that kind of like maybe like making me pretty nervous. um but yeah, like, would you say that that's correct? Like, it's kind of like it's more nerve-wracking than it may look like it is, like when you're watching the show.
For the shows where you're sort of a guest on it, like if you have a small role, like sort of the smallest role in terms of a speaking role on a show is called a co-star role, and then it's the guest star. Those are sort of like on a. I always use Law and Order as an example. So the co-star is like, the woman who found the dead body at the beginning of the episode. She's in like one scene and maybe has a couple lines. Then the guest star is like the mother of the victim, and she's got multiple scenes. She's in the hospital and she's in the courtroom and all of that. And then you've got the series regulars who are like the stars of the show. They're in every episode. Um, I find that it's especially nerve wracking when you're a co-star because you've never been on this set before. You don't know what the vibe is like. You don't know the pace of how they work. So you're there and you're kind of just like, I'm not going to ask questions. I'm not going to bother anybody. I'm going to come in and do my job. And of course, you're nervous because, again, you want to do it right. You want to leave a good impression. Um, on a show like Law and Order, if you're doing a 1 day co star role as a nurse or something, there's a chance you could come back and play a nurse in another scene on another episode or something. But it's like if you screw up or whatever, you leave a bad impression, they're like, nah, we'll find somebody else. We won't bring back that person. So you kind of have that in the back of your mind of like, oh, what can I do to make sure that they like me and want me to come back? But it's, there's very little you can do. You just got to go in, like you said, and just go in, do your job. And it is very nerve wracking. Of course, my first episode of Blind Spot, I was terrified. I'd never done any principal sort of speaking roles besides a couple of short films. I did short films and like, I think that was pretty much all I had done at that point. It was a ton of theater back home in Connecticut and then some short films, but I never worked on a huge set like this where, there were 50 extras and a whole crew behind the camera and you're doing a scene with the five stars of the show. Um, can be very, very nerve-wracking. But obviously you sort of just build up your confidence and whatnot, and you just get more comfortable and you have to see it as I'm going in to do a job and like every other job, you want to do a good job. But I find that the most nerve-wracking part of being an actor is the auditioning because especially now with self-tapes, very rarely does an actor go into an audition casting office anymore. Um, you're usually taping from home. So like this is my backdrop. This is my ring light that I use for my auditions and my mic, I plug it in and just to make sure I have some good sound and you're left also being the director of your scene and all of that and your own acting coach and all of that. When you go into an audition, they might give you a little note and you do it again. And then they're okay, great, thanks for coming in. And that's it. 2 takes maybe max if it's a small role or a simple scene. But while you're home, you're in your own head and you're filming the same thing 10, 12 times. And you get in your own head and all of that and the words can't come out and you're like, oh, I looked weird in that angle because when you're doing it in the casting office, it's they're in control. You can't see what you look like on camera, none of that. It's just you're there to audition and that's it. While you're doing it from home, you're editing it yourself and you're sending it in and you're watching it over and over and uh it's very easy to get very self-conscious when you're sort of stuck watching yourself and all of that and you know you're lucky if you have a reader who's reading the scene with you, playing the other roles who is patient because it can, you can, if you're just doing the same thing over and over, they can, understandably get a little annoyed, but which just add to the nerves. But I find that that's maybe the most nerve-wracking part. And then it's sort of you send it out and you don't hear back unless you book it. You never know. They don't the casting offices are far too busy to email everybody who auditioned and say, "Hey, we're so sorry, but we're gonna go another direction." They'll tell you if you ask your agent or manager, like, "Hey, can you check in on the role or whatever?" But if oh, the tape's due Friday, it films on Monday, and Monday morning comes, you're obviously not on set, so you didn't get it. Um, But yeah, sort of just sending it off into the ether and hoping you book it, and if you don't, you don't, and you kind of just move on. But that always stays on you, especially when it's a cool scene or a show you've always wanted to work on. I've auditioned for Law and Order a few times, and I'm just like, maybe this is the one. Doesn't happen. But you know, yeah, that can be pretty nerve-wracking. It's just the constant auditioning and the guesswork and all of that. But you just have to remember, like, it's part of the process. There's dozens of actors auditioning for one role, and there's only one role to give out, and we can't be the lucky ones every single time.
Yeah. Well, like your setup looks good, and
Thanks.
I see. I would think for myself. I could be wrong, but if I'm doing something like alone in my bedroom or whatever, and I have as many takes as I want, and nobody's watching, like if I'm doing like an Instagram thing or a TikTok thing or whatever, I would think that I would be better, or even like an audition. I would think that I personally would be more comfortable. But being in the actual thing when like you said, you have 50 extras or however many extras and everybody's kind of watching you, that to me would be, because I don't like people watching me. So obviously I don't think that I would be good at acting, but because of that. And then also like once you're in the scene, like you're kind of like on camera forever or whatever, you're going to be on TV forever. So like I would also think that it might be nerve wracking to be like, I gotta, I want to make sure like get this correct and like don't come off cringy or whatever.
Mhm.
But I mean, obviously, I'm sure that directors make sure that like you do look good. But just the idea that you're always going to be on Netflix or whatever channel, you know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like over and over again, and people are going to see you that you want to make sure you look your best. But have you had like was there any famous people on Blind Spot, or have you had any run-ins with any famous people? Or I also wanted to ask you, um, have you had any close calls in terms of auditions, like of bigger parts where like you thought you might get like or you were trying to get like a bigger part and you didn't get it for a movie or a TV show? I know that was like three questions in one, but
It's okay. I do the exact same thing.
yeah,
Yeah, in terms of on Blind Spot, I mean, Jamie Alexander was the lead, and she was terrific. She's such a badass and such a hard worker. She's talked so many times about like how much she's been like injured on the show doing stunts because it's an FBI show, and there every episode there's a new terrorist or something that they're trying to save New York from. Um, but she was in the Thor films as Lady Sif, and before that she was in the show Kyle XY from the 2000s back in the day. I don't know if you remember that show. But yeah, she's had such a long and really cool career, and I always say I kind of have like 2 degrees of separation from anyone in the MCU because of Jamie. It's like, to Robert Downey Jr. is like, oh, I was on Blind Spot with Jamie Alexander. She was in Thor with Chris Hemsworth, who was in the Avengers with Robert Downey Jr. It's like the degrees of a separation, and yeah, that was always so cool. And just on Blind Spot, a lot of the guest stars and recurring roles. There are a lot of Canadian actors doing the show. So seeing some folks like are you familiar with the movie Final Destination?
yeah,
The guy who plays like one of the friends, he has that like horrific death scene in the shower, where he's like strangled. He I didn't know it was him at the time, but he was on Blind Spot on several episodes that I did. He played like someone from the CIA, and I was like, holy crap, that's him! Like all grown up, like obviously he's like a teenager on in Final Destination, but it was just cool seeing like, oh my God, I've seen his films and all of that like over the years, and Final Destination is one of my favorite horror movies, and um, which I think is actually celebrating an anniversary this year, so that might be on my other podcast that we talk about, but in terms of like celebrity encounters, I was walking down the street once in Brooklyn with my best friend, and we're crossing the street, and I see someone sort of coming opposite like that, and realize it's Paul Rudd being escorted to set by a PA. And but we end up walking in front of them, and I like whispered to my friend, I'm like, Paul Rudd is behind us. He's like, what? He's like, wait, who's Paul Rudd? I was like, Ant-Man. He's like, no way. I was like, yeah, he's right behind us. And then obviously we're too nervous to like look to like turn around or say anything because it's just like you're in public and you're just like trying to play it cool. And I hate bothering. I've seen some like folks on the street or anything, or even at events with for Critics' Choice, and I unless I really really admire their work, will I like go up to them? But I just hate being like that guy, like, gushing over people and asking for like a selfie or something. I've done it before. I've been lucky enough at Critics' Choice events to meet actors who I've interviewed who've been on the show. So I'll be like, hey, I don't know if you remember me. You're on my show last year, or last month, or whatever. And some of them are very nice and like actually remember. And understandably though, it's like they do dozens of interviews per project, so it's I don't take any offense if they don't remember the show. Um, Usually when I tell them the name, they'll be like, "Oh yeah," because Actors with Issues is not a traditional sort of media or talk show name. They're doing something magazine or something weekly. Uh, but yeah, I actually met Lewis Pullman, who you mentioned before. I met him at Critics' Choice 2 years ago. He was there with the cast of Top Gun Maverick. So he was there at the award show, and I got to say hi to him and a few other actors, Harvey Guillen from What We Do in the Shadows, um, and a few other people. Sort of blinking right now on who. But that's been really cool, just sort of getting to meet folks who I've interviewed and introduce myself and meet in person because usually they're in LA while I'm in New York, and it's always over Zoom, over camera like this. It's never been like in-person interviews that I've done. Um, but yeah, those have been really cool to sort of chat with folks who I otherwise would not have had the chance to meet in like a regular encounter.
Yeah. And then the third question I asked was, have you had any close calls with like bigger roles or?
Um, Close calls, no. There've been a good handful of roles that in like 2021 and 2022, I had a different representation back then. I had a different manager, and I was very fortunate. They got me some great auditions, and there was a few that I was hoping to get like a callback for. But then, you end up seeing who they cast, and you're like, oh yeah, they look perfect for this role. So no wonder I didn't get it. So that you just also have to kind of remember that as an actor, it's like there's a million reasons you won't get a role. It has nothing to do with your talent or your looks. It could just be you look too young compared to who they cast in the lead, or it could be as silly as there's too many blondes in this movie, or or whatever it is, or it's like, oh, they don't look related enough, or it's so many different reasons that that you don't get cast in a role. But I've auditioned. I've been fortunate enough to like have a couple auditions for some Marvel projects. No idea what they were because they're always like untitled Marvel series or something. So it's like they're really keeping it under wraps. Uh, and those have been fun to sort of audition and maybe try and like guess what the project ends up being. Um, and A few pilots that I auditioned for that were like an all Latino cast, which was really cool. I'm like, oh, that would have been really cool to be a part of. Um, yeah, just none too much. I try not to focus too much on the ones I didn't get. Otherwise, I'd be beating myself up a lot, over like why I didn't get it or anything. But definitely one of the Marvel projects would have been really cool to at least like get a callback for or go along in the process a little bit more. Because for those roles, the bigger roles, you do your tape, you send that in. They might want to do a callback, so you either tape again or you do it over Zoom, or these days you do them in person, sort of that second round of auditions, and then you do another round in front of the producers or the director, and then sort of the final like screen test. And the screen test, I've never done a screen test, but just from what I've heard and what other actors have told me, with the screen test, which is sort of like the final audition that in a week you might find out whether you got it or not. Before you go in the audition room, you have to sign your contract. Um, so it's like if you get it, this is it. You agree to do it if you get it. And for television, if it's like a network series that's on any of the big four, like Fox or ABC, it's usually a 6 year contract, a 6 season contract before you're allowed to like leave the show willingly. And that's when all like the renegotiation comes in. But it's crazy as an actor. It's like, this thing you've been wanting to do for so long, and you finally get the chance, and you have this piece of paper in front of you saying you're gonna have a job for the next 6 years, if of course it gets renewed. A lot of times shows don't get renewed these days. It's hard to stay around for more than one season, it feels like. But yeah, those I have always I've never been fortunate enough to be in that position. I hope so at some point in my career. But Yeah, sort of just waiting for the right role because none of the ones that I've auditioned for have I felt that like this truly could be like a great role that I would really want to do for multiple years on end, you know?
Yeah, and then have you had any like crazy stories on set? I don't even really know what crazy would entail on a like TV set, but um, yeah. Like, are any weird, crazy stories or like any interesting, fun kind of stories?
Yeah, I mean, on Blind Spot was really cool because my second to last episode, I was actually added in rather last minute. I was supposed to do in season 5, I was supposed to do just the series finale, but then they said they had casting had reached out to me and said, "Hey, we actually they want to add you to an earlier episode of the season." So I got to do two. I think I did. It was season 5, episodes 9 and 11. So I was supposed to do just 11, and they said they want to add you to episode 9. Are you available? And I was, yeah, of course. And they said, okay, great. And then they send me the script, and my character's in this huge shootout scene where like the good guys and the bad guys are having this huge shootout, and like the iconic or iconic. I love Blind Spot, but it wasn't that popular of a show. It was like the number one new drama the first season it came out. Um, but in terms of like the zeitgeist, I don't think it's even streaming anywhere right now, which sucks. But the main set of like the FBI set, I held a gun on set for the first time. I was in my first action scene. I did my first stunts, and that was like a maybe 90-second to 2 minute sequence we shot. It took 14 hours.
Whoa.
Because like you said before, you're doing multiple takes, multiple angles, and all of that. So we do the dialogue and that sort of tense moment beforehand, and then um it was a whole setup to do a whole like process to set up the set for the action sequence. So you've got the stunt coordinator going over to some of the actors. Okay, you're gonna take him down here, do a couple hits or whatever. You disarm him, you do this, you do that, and then you've got the safety officers coming over and saying, okay, so your gun is plugged. There are blanks. They'll open it up and show you with the flashlight. There's nothing in the chamber. These are all blank bullets or blank rounds. Um, and it's crazy because you rehearse it without any of the effects, and then when they actually roll, they start recording. It's a whole other thing. It's nothing like what you would have expected because they've put in these tiny squibs, which are these teeny tiny little explosives that they'll put on someone's like under someone's coat when they're getting shot or something, so that something like pops up. You know, so but they had those hidden all over the set, and they have another guy offset with what looks like a paintball gun, but it's basically throwing like sparks, so it looks like bullets are ricocheting off of the wall, and you've got little air cannons blowing paper like pieces of paper and debris and whatnot, so it looks like things are exploding all over the air. And it's just you're not prepared for that. You know what it looks like on TV because you've seen so many scenes like that, but sort of being in the world and whatnot, you're one of the guys shooting, and as you shoot, a stunt performer like goes down. So in your head, you're like, "Oh my God, I just killed a guy!" Like it's such a weird thing because even when you're doing theater, it's not that elaborate. You're doing a stunt. You're doing a fight scene maybe with a couple of swords if you're doing some Shakespearean work, and it's a quick scene. There's not some big epic battle you play out on stage. But yeah, doing that kind of stuff was really really cool and just so out of the ordinary because all the other episodes I'd done a blind spot, I was in an FBI lab, sort of doing forensics or things like that, and now I'm a guy with the gun. It's I guess my character got promoted. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was really really cool.
And as we know, sadly, because of the Alec Baldwin situation, like you
Yeah.
actually do have like a real gun, right? Was it a real gun with blanks in it?
Yes, so they that whole debacle was insane.
Yeah.
Hearing that story, I was like, who messed up? Because it's one of those things that it's kind of the last person it's on is the actor because there's about 7 people whose hands that weapon goes in before it ends up in the actor's hands. And like I said, they show you they pull back the chamber and they shine a flashlight in it to show you there's nothing in there. and they load it for you and all of that. And when you shoot, they're blank rounds, and they'll, you shoot, they'll fly out. So because you need that effect, um, it'll fly off like the side of it to show like an empty bullet casing. But yeah, it's they're very, very, very careful. This is an NBC show. It's a sort of a big budget on a big network. To my understanding, Alec Baldwin was like that was like a very small independent production in a state where it was a right to work state, so it wasn't a union crew, so they probably weren't as experienced in handling that kind of thing.
Where
Um,
was that? Was that Utah or something, or like somewhere like that?
Something like that, somewhere out in the
Yeah.
Midwest, yeah, um, or in the Southwest. Um, but yeah, for Blind Spot, it was very, very much like I was not nervous in the sense of like safety because so many people were sort of making sure that everything was running smoothly. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it still does seem weird to me that they would even use real guns, but it's kind of like it seems they would can't use like a fake gun that like does the same thing. You know what I mean? Like why even use a real gun?
I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
really don't know. It depends on the set and of course on the budget and whatnot. Because I guess it's more about the look of it. You can always kind of tell when it's a fake gun. It kind of looks cheap and whatnot, and
Yeah.
and you just the feel of it. On the set, it's a real pistol, but again, it's sort of plugged in it. So even if there is a real bullet in it, there's nothing would come out because it's like sort of welded shut. So there's that sort of second level of safety. Not only is it a blank, but it's also like welded, um, to make sure nothing comes out in case a real bullet does end up in the gun. But yeah, it's very. I forget your question. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem. Like why don't they just use
Oh
fake
yeah,
guns? But I feel like Quentin Tarantino in an interview said the same thing as you, which was it has to be realistic, but it almost seems like they could potentially make a fake gun that looks and feels the same way as a real gun, but doesn't actually shoot any bullets in case of some sort of mishap or something. But
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I
Yeah.
think it's with the whole Alec Baldwin situation. I think it was just multiple levels of sort of negligence. It was a live round in a gun that was not welded shut. It was just multiple things. It's like there were multiple steps that were not taken, which is really why what happened. And it's really just it's so unfortunate that someone lost their life because of that incident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in terms of making or in terms of making it in Hollywood or wherever in New York or Hollywood or just the business in general, what do you think like some of the main skills or attributes are? And like when I'm doing something, I like to like kind of like think like what's the best way for me to succeed at this? But there's got to be a way. In my mind, it's not just all luck. Like there is obviously some luck or a good amount of luck to
Right.
everything. But what would you? And I would almost think that like part of it in Hollywood would almost be kind of like networking and like if I was just Leonardo DiCaprio's good friend or something, then he could put me in a role, or if I knew this person or if I knew that person. And obviously I think that is a big aspect to it. But do you um yeah, like so what are the skills that people need? And also do you feel like that's a big ask just knowing who you know and even being like a what do they call it? Like gentrific or not gentrification, but like when you're related to somebody and then like you automatically get a role because you're
Oh yeah, nepotism.
yeah, nepotism. So what do you think are the big factors to play whether you get big or not?
I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt to know someone or to be related to someone. Everyone that cries about nepo babies, it's like, oh, shut up. If you were related to someone in the industry, you would not tell them like, no, I want to make it on my own. Like, get real, people. There's always people online that like complain about nepo babies, and it's like, look, there's also for me, there's like two levels of nepo babies. There's the ones who are given a shot that maybe they didn't earn, that it was solely because of who they're related to. But then there's the ones who stick around and do really good work. Like there's a lot of nepo babies people don't realize are nepo babies because they're really good at what they do. Maud Apatow is related to Judd Apatow, iconic comedy director. She's great on Euphoria. You've got Jack Quaid, who's great on The Boys and one of the Scream films. Who's an Oppenheimer. He's related to Dennis Quaid, who is No offense to Dennis, but sort of a fading star. He was great in The Substance, but his character was gross. But whatever. But there's sort of that, and then there's the level of nepo babies like Jack Quaid and whatnot who are great at what they do and have continued booking work because they're good. The bad nepo babies don't stick around. They'll maybe get one or two like movies or whatever, and everyone's like they're horrible. It's obvious that they got in because of who they know, and they just sort of don't live up to the standards that the rest of us are held up to. And when they don't, they usually just don't stick around. You mentioned Nosferatu before. Lily Rose Depp, terrific in that movie, and the daughter of Johnny Depp. But yeah, I think in terms of what you need, I mean, there's that old saying, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. Um, the opportunities can come your way, but if you're not prepared, it's not going to work out. And you can be prepared 100% of the time, but if the opportunities don't come your way, that's not going to work out either. So it really is a mix of both. It's being prepared, sort of, again, another old saying, being in the right place at the right time. I was lucky I got all these auditions, as I mentioned, for sort of bigger projects and whatnot, because in those couple of years, there were a lot of projects that they wanted a lot of um, representation for the Latino community. So I was fortunate to audition for a lot of those projects. There was like maybe a year that I auditioned for maybe a dozen like films or shows that had prominent Latino casts. And I was very lucky that I got to do that because that was like, oh, finally, there's a lot of work for Hispanic actors and for Latino actors in the States in English. Because, sure, you can go act in Mexico, but, there's only so much work out there. And even they cast out of LA. But yeah, I think that, just preparation and luck being part of that is really important. And just knowing your type and knowing who you are and what you can bring to the table in an effortless way. A lot of young actors worry about like, range and challenging themselves and taking roles that are opposite of who they are and all of that. It's like you can want that all you want, but you have to be realistic with this industry. You have because, the first thing a casting director looks at is a headshot. So it's like, is this a headshot of how you look in your day to day? Is this how are you gonna look like that photo when you walk into the audition room, or when they click play on your audition tape? And just knowing, like, I'm a huge nerd. I've got a bunch of pop figures off camera here, and copies of plays and graphic novels and all of that. And I, have played lab techs and journalists, and journalism is literally what I do for a living. So it's like, I'm not exactly what I've done so far is not exactly a stretch of the imagination. And I think just sort of, people all, there's always folks who are like, oh, this person acts the same in every single movie. It's like, well, that's just who they are, and it's charming and it's appealing and relatable, and that's what it is. Not every movie can be a Nosferatu. That's sort of like challenging the genre and all of that, and making people a little bit uncomfortable. Who no one wants to watch that all the time. Sometimes you want to just put on something light and funny or charming or whatever. And yeah, I think knowing sort of what they say is like your type is very important. When they talk about typecasting, that's very much what that is. It's sort of who you perceive immediately and what you can do effortlessly. Is very important to know what that is, because a lot of times like, oh, we need to cast a barista in this scene that takes place at a coffee bar in Brooklyn. That's going to look like a certain type of person, the sort of very handsome surfer guy, probably not going to get that role, but the guy that looks like a hipster is more likely to get that role or whatever. A story that takes place in another part of the country or in another time period, some people look that more than others. Some people look too contemporary, they look too modern, whether it's the hair or their style or whatever, and things you can't quite fix quickly. So sometimes, yeah, it's just important to sort of know what you can bring to the table and what your type is, and that's just how you get your foot in the door. Um, in terms of getting auditions and whatnot, because it's like you want a casting director to look at your headshot and say, "Oh, they look great for the role. Let's give them an audition and we'll see what they look like on tape and what they sound like." Because someone can look really handsome and they start talking and they sound like Alvin the Chipmunk. You never know. It's a factor of multiple things. Um, yeah, I'm a rambler. Sorry, fellow podcaster. I ramble a lot too.
Yeah, no problem. I have a lot to say with everything that you just
Yeah.
said, but well, one was you mentioned the barista thing, and there was that, and obviously I know what you're talking about with the barista, but like, it just reminded me of that scene. I don't know if you saw Barry or not, but there was a scene in
Yeah.
Barry where like they had that like surfer dude as I think he was like in a coffee shop or something, and he was like super. It was like kind of a small role, but he was in it a couple times, I think, where he was like this
Mhm.
super like chill kind of stoner surfer dude. Do you remember that scene? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Vaguely. It's been a
Yeah,
couple years since I've watched Barry, but yeah.
it was really just random. I just like thought of that guy because I thought that that was like pretty funny. He was like just like the super chill like surfer dude as a barista. Let's say, "What's up, man? Like, here's your coffee."
Yeah.
But then also you mentioned Maud Apatow and Lily Rose Depp, and like yeah, and even like Maya Hawke. It's like, but like
Hmm.
with Maud Apatow and Lily Rose Depp, obviously Lily Rose Depp did a really good job. I mean, she is really good. Like you kind of look at her and like you're like, oh, she's just gonna be Johnny Depp's daughter, but it's like no, she was fucking great in that
Yeah.
movie. And then also anything with Euphoria is just amazing, and it's like really kind of sad to me that they come out with these like really good shows like Euphoria, Mindhunter, even like Black Summer. I don't know if you saw Black Summer on Netflix. I really liked. It was like this kind of like I'm not really into zombie shows, but it was like a really good zombie show. And then I don't know about Mindhunter. Did you watch Mindhunter at all?
I didn't, but I know of it. The with
Yeah.
Jonathan Groff. Yeah.
And yeah, and David Fincher's the director, and they decided, oh, we're just not going to do this anymore, even though it's an amazing show up there, and then Euphoria almost got canceled. It sounds like they're kind of going to do the third season, and then with Lily Rose Depp in The Idol, I know a lot of people didn't like The Idol, and it kind of like did go off the. Did you watch The Idol?
No, I was going to, and they just kept hearing about how not great it was, so I was just like, I'll skip it.
I think that it could have.
Yeah.
The thing is, I really saw potential there, and it's like they definitely didn't probably nail it at the end, probably because they just I think decided to shut it down. But I think that guy is really good. Sam Levinson, I think is his name, right? Like the creator
The
of that.
director? Yeah.
Yeah, that in Euphoria. But anyways, yeah, obviously like those actors are great, and like you said, I don't think that they would probably if they're not good, they probably wouldn't be moving on to other roles. But then what's funny is I just saw I don't know if you saw Tulsa King at all, but
I did, yeah.
yeah, so like there was a girl in the show, um, and for whatever reason I was like, who is this girl? Like, why is she in the show? So I looked her up, and like she happened to be like Sylvester Stallone's daughter, and I think that like I almost think that like he put
Mm-hmm.
her in the role. And she was like kind of like tending to the horses. At first she was like working at the restaurant, and then she was like tending to the horses, and I was kind of like it kind of seemed like one of those situations where he just wanted to like put his daughter in the role, but I don't know, who knows. But anyways, then you also mentioned the Latino in Hollywood they're trying to do, give everybody an opportunity to play a role.
Yeah.
And me personally, like I look at that as being like, yeah, like that's a good thing. That's obviously a kind thing to do because
Mm-hmm.
white Americans have basically been playing majority of the roles for the past 100 years, and now we're
Yeah.
giving people a chance to like do different things. How do you view all this type of stuff? Some people might call it like wokeness or whatever, like the whole woke thing or
Yeah.
whatever. Do you agree with it, or do you feel like it's helping or hurting Hollywood, I guess?
I don't think it's hurting Hollywood. I think so. The thing is, there is having meaningful representation and diversity, and then there's pandering. Because there have been some times that I'm like, as a queer person myself, as a Latino, I'm like, did we need a gay person in this story? They're not adding anything, or it just feels unnecessary, or the acting's bad because it's clearly not a queer person that they cast, or the writing is stereotypical. So it's like, well, this isn't helping because they're the butt of the joke, or they're being, it's an obnoxious character or whatever. That again, it's not adding anything to the story. So it's like, do we want offensive representation or like quality, meaningful representation? Which is why I loved some of the shows I got to audition for, and was a fan of when I saw them when they actually came out. was because it was a new story being told from a diverse perspective, and it didn't feel like I was being pandered to, or anything like that, because it's like, oh, this is great writing, great direction, great performances, and it's like, yeah, we deserve to have great projects too. We shouldn't only be sort of, stuck doing shows about drug lords or whatever, about the cartel. It's like we can offer so much more than that. Speaking about the Hispanic community, and with the queer community as well, it's like, not every single story of ours has to be about someone's tragic coming out, or a queer person's like suffering. There's so many opportunities and so many stories out there that can still be told that are joyful. Where's the queer joy? Where's, they talk about that all the time. Like, where's the black joy? Where's, just all these different types of stories that, like, how come there's no queer rom-coms, and things like that. Like, there's literally like three that I can name that have ever existed, that are at least, backed by a major studio. I'm sure there's tons of indie rom-coms out there that, came and went, but yeah, it's the getting the opportunity to tell stories that are relevant to me as a person is always great. And, like you said, white actors have gotten to rule this industry, and be at the front and center for since its inception, since, pre-depression era silent pictures, so it's like, okay, just let's everyone shove down, let's make a little more room at the table to let some different perspectives in, you know
Yeah.
um yeah. And I hate when people, and it's used all the time, but you hear, like, oh, this is woke garbage, and I'm like, you people have overused that word so much, it has lost all meaning and doesn't mean anything anymore, truly. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
it's so annoying, because it's like, it's woke. Like, okay, so, and mind you, that word stems from, like, black slang in this country. A lot of words that are sort of used widespread now originated as black slang. So, woke, I think, originally meant, no one quote me on this, I'm not entirely 100% sure, but it's sort of like, of you being aware, you literally being like woke to what's going on. So when people use it as an insult, this is woke garbage. I'm like, so are you saying you'd rather be asleep and ignorant to the problems in the world? You don't want to be woke? Like, I don't know. I guess people just think ignorance is bliss, and they want to live in their bubble. That's fine, but the rest of us shouldn't have to, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I view it the same way, and to be honest with you, whenever I hear somebody talking about it, I don't even really know what they're talking about. Like, with like Bill Maher or like Jordan Peterson or like one of those types of guys, when they're like, they just go off on the woke, and it's like, dude, I like barely see woke ever. Like, it's like,
Right.
it's just weird to me, but it's like, unless I'm in like the wrong places on the internet, but like it's not really affecting my life at all. Like, there's a very small percentage of people who are like trying to blast this in my face, and what do I care? Even if they do, like, it's their right to be woke or not woke, but like it seems like they're talking about it like way more than it's actually like affecting anybody's life. And I mean, obviously, in terms of like movies and TV, if something, I don't even really want to call it woke, but if it's too kind of like washed down, I think that it can be boring, and that's not really woke, but that's more kind of
Yeah.
like maybe too politically correct or something where it's kind of like just boring. But then you have shows like Euphoria that, even though it is kind of woke in a way, like I think that the people on the show are woke, or he's woke or whatever in general. It's a pretty fucking crazy show. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, people will
It's
complain
pushing
about like,
boundaries. It's telling stories that haven't been told yet.
yeah,
It's like I said before, it's not pandering. None of the things that they're trying to say feel disingenuous.
yeah,
And whatnot. Yeah.
yeah, and so people will complain about, oh, like the movies and TV shows just aren't like, what they used to be. They're too washed down or whatever. But it's like, look at Euphoria, look at, I mean, there's tons of other examples that I can't think of right now. I mean, there's still some shows that are pushing the boundaries. But yeah, so it's been like an hour, so we can wrap up soon. But I wanted to ask, how much of like, is there a ton of like kind of like what's the word, like a hierarchy where like people at the bottom are like trying, or not even at the bottom, but are like trying to get to the top, and like they're like kind of like kissing people's butts, kind of like type of thing to get to the, you know what I mean? Like, I'm having a hard time putting that into words, but like, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Is there a lot of that in Hollywood where like you just kind of have to like suck up to the
I
right
f-
people?
I feel like that's very much what it used to be. Pre Me Too, pre Time's Up. There was a lot of unsavory things being done behind the scenes, behind closed doors, for people to get ahead. But I feel like now it's just no one wants to, you know, be scandalized. So I feel like there's a lot less of that now. Um, and there's nothing linear about this industry to begin with. You know, there is no like, oh, once I book three co-star roles, then I'll get a guest star. I'll do a couple guest star roles, and then I'll get a series regular, and then I'll be in a show for 6 years. It's like, well, that that'd be nice if that's how it worked out. But there's no rhyme or reason to how this industry works exactly. I feel like every actor is just sort of given a basic checklist of what they need to get started, and what happens after that is what happens. You just have to be prepared after. But yeah, in terms of like kissing the rings and all of that stuff. I feel like that's mostly been done away with. Of course, there's probably still some studio executives or network executives or something that, are still difficult to work with, and it's their way or the highway, and are still kind of toxic and all of that. But, hopefully they're not around for too long because we need the right people in charge to get quality content out there, um, that will stick around for a while, you know?
Yeah, well, that's good to hear that things are like kind of like equaling out. And I'm sure, like you said, there's still people out there like I don't know for some reason like Tom Cruise comes to mind or something, but like who like just probably have this. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about Tom Cruise, but um, who still kind of have this like worship me type thing. But anyway, so yeah, your show. I want obviously I wanted to get to your show earlier, but we had a lot to say about the acting. So your show, go ahead and plug your show. I wanted to ask too, what when you say the actors with issues, what do you feel like the issues are? And then also if you can kind of cover maybe who you've had on. Like I said, I know about the Lewis Pullman one,
Mhm.
but anybody else that I would know? Yeah.
Yeah, so again, the show started right at the beginning of COVID, and I always wanted to just have a platform to talk with actors about like what problems do you have with the industry, with your career, that like what are the struggles you've gone through that you can shed a light on. So for some people, it's terrible audition anxiety, or imposter syndrome, navigating mental health, moving to the other side of the country from their family and having to basically start over alone, and just things like that. I've talked with some actors about sort of like, I'm in Canada and I want to work in Hollywood, but you kind of have to figure out the balance because you can't, someone from another country can't just move to the US and start working. There's visas involved and all of that. And folks have talked about that, which has been really interesting. But yeah, when it comes to sort of like the issues, that's mainly what folks are talking about, is sort of their sort of personal career, struggles and the obstacles that they've overcome, how they've overcome it, or how they're dealing with it now if it's something that they're still dealing with. And yeah, during the pandemic, a lot of it was like realizing how bad that they were at taking care of themselves, because it's so much like hustle and, um, you're working late night so that you can be available during the day to go to auditions. This is pre-COVID when things were still in person all the time, and um, you go to some theater open calls and you audition for the ensemble of a new musical, or you've got a TV audition or a commercial audition or modeling or whatever it is, and then you've got class at noon, and then you've got your shift at the restaurant in the evening, and it's like you're just constantly going, and actors forget to take care of themselves. They forget to take a second to sit and read a book or put on a face mask or go to the gym and go get some fresh air. It's just constant work, work, work. It's the work you want to do and then the work you need to do to pay the bills. So early in the show, that was very much what a lot of actors talked about. And then sort of as the show grew and we got to talk to some, more established, names and established actors and whatnot, just sort of like reflecting on their early career and, um, things they wish they could have told themselves or what they know now compared to back then. Um, and sort of giving like a little behind the scenes look, at the industry. based on their own experiences. Like, oh, I thought that, there's this one actress I interviewed, Patina Miller. She's on the show Power, Raising Kanan on Stars. And she has a Tony Award for her work in theater on Broadway, and she's done a bunch of Broadway shows. Fabulous actress, and she talked about how she was on a show called Madam Secretary on CBS and was on that show for like 5 or 6 years. And when that show was ending, she was sort of panicking. She's like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do next? Like, what's the next job?" And she went and did one of the Hunger Games films. And after that finished, she's like, "Oh, what's next? What's next? Like, what? I need something else. Like, what is it?" You'd think that, as an established actor, they wouldn't really have that sort of slight anxiety of what's the next gig, that younger actors have, or less experienced actors have. And she sort of just shared like that feeling doesn't always go away, even um, bringing it back to Tom Cruise. When one Mission Impossible movie finishes, he is already working on the next one. Like, okay, what's next? Like, what's the next one? We gotta keep going and keep the momentum going. And every actor of every level does that. I feel like no actor who enjoys acting really sort of finishes a project and is like, okay, time to go on vacation for 6 months, or I'll take the rest of the year off. They're like, nope, what's the next job? Gotta, like, keep that ball rolling, keep the momentum going, because relevance is such a big thing in this industry. You want your name to sort of be out there, um, sort of at all times. Um, there was one more thing you asked at the end there.
Oh, like who else
Yeah,
you've interviewed?
who? Yes,
Well,
yes, yes.
I'll actually add two questions to that
Mhm.
too. Who
Yeah.
you've interviewed that I may know, and I'm sure there's probably people I don't know who are also big on Broadway or whatever. Um, but then also, is there anybody that you want to that you haven't yet that you want to interview that you haven't yet?
Oh, that's a long list, man.
Yeah,
There's there's folks whose reps I've reached out to. And I've reached out to their publicists or their agents or managers or something, and some are very polite and are like, "Oh, they're not available right now, or they're in production, so they're literally not available." Sometimes you got to just make up something to let you down easy, which I understand. Um, but yeah, it's a long list of folks that I would love to talk to. There's a lot of people who like I grew up watching who I would love to chat with. That's like who've been in this industry for a long time. Nicholas Hoult comes to mind because he's been acting since he was a teenager. And it's just like you're
wow,
now, he went from these indie films in the UK to doing bigger Hollywood films like the X-Men series. He was Beast, in those prequels. And now he's sort of back to doing these prestige films like Nosferatu. Juror Number Two was great. He was great in that, and he's done television. He was in the show The Great, and when he was younger, he was in Skins and all of that. I just want to like chat with actors like that who've been sort of just consistently working for like 20 years and just be like, what's it like? Like how much has it changed? Especially that when they're the young actors who are sort of on the end of they sort of came up with streaming and whatnot. Like, and now you're doing shows for a streaming platform versus a traditional network and all of that. But yeah, and Nicholas Hoult seems like such a down to earth guy. Any like interview or anything like that I see of him, he seems so chill. And same with his
yeah,
co-star Aaron Taylor Johnson, also been in this business for like 20 years, working consistently, doing smaller indie films, giving amazing performances, getting nominations, and then going doing an Avengers movie, or something like Nosferatu. And in terms of folks that I have interviewed, Patrick Wilson is a great dude. He was such a delight to chat with. He was in the Insidious films as the dad in The Conjuring and
yeah.
Aquaman. Big Broadway guy as well. He was really really cool to chat with, and Lewis Pullman, of course, as we discussed. Trying to think who else. Heather Morris was on Glee, which I know a lot of folks watched back in the day. I watched a bit of it and then was forced to stop watching because I was in a very conservative household and I was not allowed to watch shows with gay people in them. So I had to stop watching that show, sadly. Um, but I'm rewatching it now as an adult, so it's been cool to see that. But and some young actors, who are coming up who have done really really cool stuff. This one actor, Diego Tinoco, he was in a Netflix series called On My Block, He was on our show. He was lovely and gave like an hour of his time, and just chatted about sort of his that was his first like legit job, his first big role, and he did 4 seasons of that show. And talking about that was really cool. And um, Ludi Lin is another actor. He was in the CW show Kung Fu. He plays Liu Kang in the Mortal Kombat films. He was also in the Power Rangers film from a few years ago. So sort of similarly, like projects that um, sort of going from smaller shows to bigger budget Hollywood films was really cool. And again, full circle to Law and Order. Raul Esparza was on Law and Order SVU as like their district attorney for like 8 years, I think. He's a big Broadway guy as well. He was in the series Hannibal as well. And one last name that comes to mind, Annette O'Toole. She played Martha Kent in Smallville back in the day. She was delightful to chat with. She was on a Netflix show that my mom loves called Virgin River. So getting to chat with her was really cool. Just sort of like, I used to watch you on this show 20 years ago, and she had a long career before that, Oscar nominated songwriter and actress and all of that. And I've gotten to chat with some folks from like Cobra Kai, some of the bigger shows that are on right now, and Dahmer, um, Never Have I Ever. A lot of young actors from like Netflix and CW stuff has been really cool to chat with them and sort of just get their perspective on coming up in the industry right now, and especially like since COVID and all of that. But yeah.
How easy or hard is it to get like some of the maybe like smaller like if but I actually have wanted to get some actors on. Is it pretty hard just to get them on or or no?
It really depends on their schedule. Because actors pay for a publicist. And it's not year round. So if they're not active with their publicist at that time, they're usually just not available for press because they might be traveling, they might be filming out of town, or just busy otherwise, or they might not have anything to promote. A lot of times actors kind of want to come on to talk about a specific project that they're actively promoting to get folks to watch or whatever. Um, yeah, it really depends on what their schedule is, because there have been some folks who like I actively emailed about for like 2 years. I think Diego Tinoco is one of them, but he was always kind of busy filming something. And then there was finally some downtime that he had, and I got in touch. I think it was probably his one of his reps. I think his manager. And he was like, I think his publicist said, "Oh, he's not currently active with us right now. Um, get in touch with his management." So I did, and we set it up, and it was again lovely chat because he finally had some time in his schedule to like sit down and chat. So it really depends on their availability, but it's always best to sort of go through their publicist if they're like on a lead on a show. A lot of times the smaller actors, like I don't have a publicist, but if someone, we connected through Reddit as we talked about before. Um, but when the show started, I was DMing a lot of actors, young actors who I saw had small parts in a new show that came out during COVID, and I was like, "Hey, I've got a podcast. Do you want to come on the show and talk about your work and whatnot?" And sometimes they respond, sometimes they don't. But the ones that do, usually lovely people who give a great chat. But yeah, there's so many different ways to get in touch with people now. It used to be just publicists, but now you can kind of contact them directly, via Instagram DM or um, tagging them on Twitter. That's worked before too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we live in a world now where you can like potentially get a hold of anybody, and obviously the bigger names probably won't respond. Like you probably have to through a publicist, but
Mhm.
some like the maybe middle names or like smaller names, people who aren't as famous or whatever, will actually you might just be able to get a hold of them, directly. And then in terms of the issues part, I know I'm dragging this on, but in terms of the issues part, you hear that a lot of people in LA like kind of are stuck up or just kind of like are doing the job as they want to be seen or maybe like narcissistic or whatever. Do you find that to be true or no? Do you feel like most of the people are actually pretty like not, not stuck up, down to earth, friendly people?
Of the 200 plus episodes we've done, I don't think I've interviewed a single unpleasant person. I think genuinely all of them are lovely, lovely people. Um, who knows? They could just be really, really great actors, and they're like, "I'm here to promote something. I have to be charming. I have to be nice," and you never know. But um, there's always people who sort of move to LA with that sort of attitude of I have to make it and I have to be personable and like a ray of sunshine to every single person I meet, and that can be a little off-putting, I guess. But a lot of the people that I know who are in LA are transplants. None of them are from there. They're from New York. They're from the Midwest. They're from the East Coast or anything, and they moved out there to be part of the industry. Um, but yeah, those stuck-up people, that energy comes off on them. That radiates off of them. So it's like, I feel like casting directors can sort of smell the bullshit a mile away. Pardon my language. But yeah, you know, you can always just kind of read that energy off of people, especially casting. Someone walks in a room and there's an interaction beforehand where you're not acting yet, you're not doing the scene, or just sort of someone's attitude. You can always just kind of tell if someone's going to rub you the wrong way or not. It's kind of, that's weird to say. Um, but yeah, the people I've encountered who are successful in this industry have not been unpleasant or anything like that, thankfully.
Yeah, and like I said, I live like an hour or more outside of LA, so I'm not in LA. But a lot of people will say like the people in LA or in this area are stuck up or whatever, and it's like I kind of find, yeah, it's for the most part not as true as people think. Like obviously there are people who are, but then there's a ton of people who aren't. And I actually just had a guy on who was a lawyer, and now he moved from Nebraska to here to be
Mm.
an actor. And I was like, what experience do you have and all that? And he like really didn't have much experience. I guess he got an agent somehow and he had written a script and he just up and moved here during the
Okay.
fires.
Wow.
And he's been in some stuff. So I'm like, wow, I gotta give you credit for doing that. But and he's like older too. Not really old, but like in his 40s or whatever. And
Mm.
that's a tough thing to do, but it's a hard business. But yeah, so
Yeah.
lastly, and I probably this will be the I always ask any movies, TV shows, podcasts, music, whatever you want to recommend, and then obviously your podcast. And also, is your podcast on YouTube and podcast like Apple Podcasts and Spotify on
Yes,
both?
everywhere.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So you'll find us Actors with Issues on, we have a YouTube channel, so you can watch the interviews that we do. You can also listen to them, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can visit our website, actorswithissues.com. I write an article for every episode that goes up. So there's always something sort of brief to read with that. I do some sort of some article interviews only because sometimes an actor only has like 10 minutes to spare, and that's not really a podcast. Not long enough for a podcast. I'll just write an article based off of that quick 10-minute interview, or we post some like trailers, some industry news and stuff like that on there. Um, Hard to keep up when you're a team of one like myself, um, and all of that. But yeah, available everywhere. And some podcasts I love. Trying to think, what's the last like movie I saw in theaters? I've been watching a lot of the sort of prestige stuff because of Critics' Choice. We get screeners, so we get to watch them in advance of voting and whatnot. You mentioned Honora before. Loved Honora. I thought Wicked was such a fun watch. It was so cool. Um, Again, I'm a theater guy, so I was just nerding out. Like, oh my god, they sound so great, and orchestrations are so cool. Um, uh, Nosferatu was great. Not for everybody. I understand some people didn't love it, and I'm like, that's fine. If you're expecting a horror movie, it's not really a horror movie in that sense. But none of Eggers' movies are like straight up horror. They're very sort of eerie and suspenseful. Pretty old school in terms of the level of horror. Um, and as far as shows, for anyone who likes sort of like traditional case of the week type shows, Matlock is really great. It's on CBS and on Paramount Plus. It's starring Kathy Bates, who is an incredible actress, and she's so great in this role. She was gonna retire initially, and then she took on this role, and it's a huge hit. So it's like that's awesome that she gets to continue doing what she does. Um, Shrinking on Apple TV Plus is a great show. Jason Segel, Harrison Ford, great comedy. Um, what else am I watching right now? Um, Nothing else comes to mind. But in terms of podcasts, I actually love podcasts that are similar to yours and to mine, that where they're interviewing actors and sort of just hearing people's stories, and whatnot. So I love the show Smartless. It's hosted by Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. They have a different person on the show every week. Sometimes they're actors, sometimes they're like studio heads. They just had Jason Blum, the head of Blumhouse. They have some athletes on, which is really cool because I'm not a sports person at all. So hearing some athletes' stories is really cool. Um, there's also another similar comedy podcast called Handsome that I started listening to recently. It's Tig Notaro, Fortune Feimster, and Mae Martin, three hilarious comedians. They have sort of one of their actor or celebrity friends call in and ask a question, and then they sort of just discuss the question, like, um, do you believe in aliens? And they sort of talk about their little encounters with aliens or things they've seen or heard or whatever. And really funny. They're hysterical. If you want to just laugh for an hour, that's a great show to listen to. And yeah, those are kind of the two that I also love The Office. So I listen to The Office Ladies. So the Office recap show with Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey. That's another great one. Um, yeah, I just love industry stuff. I'm a total nerd for my field of work, whether it's acting or journalism. I love either side of it.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And one thing about acting in movies and TV, like everybody kind of like knows about it, so it's something that you can kind of like talk with anybody about, because
Yeah.
everybody watches, for the most part, watches movies and TV shows. What was the Kathy Bates show called? I missed that.
Matlock, M A T
Matlock.
L O
Oh,
C K. Yeah.
so it's like a new version of Matlock,
Yeah,
or
it's
it?
funny
Yeah.
because they reference it in the show, and she's like, "Oh, my name is Madeline Matlock." Yes, like the TV show. It's sort of an in joke, which is very funny, and it's great. It's a sort of she plays a lawyer, um, in a woman of a certain age, so an older lawyer who's sort of coming out of retirement because she needs to work and all of that. But there's a great mystery underlying the whole thing, in addition to the case of the week type of thing, and I don't want to spoil any of it, but the pilot is fantastic. Like if you're not hooked by the end of that pilot episode, it's really great.
And
Um,
it's based off of the previous Matlock. It's like this.
it's a legal drama basically.
Okay.
It's not like sort of a direct remake or a direct reboot. Um, but yeah, that's a great show in particular. And
Okay.
also sort
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
obvious ones like Hacks is great on HBO Max. Shogun is terrific. Those are sort of the obvious award-winning shows. The Bear, I don't think it's particularly funny. I don't know why it's considered a comedy, but it's a great show.
Yeah. And then, have you seen The Brutalist yet?
I have not yet. No, that's
No.
the one screener I haven't had the chance to watch yet because it's a very long watch. So it's carving out like 3 hours to watch it is difficult. But I'd love to really, I'll probably get around to that this weekend now that I finally have a weekend off. But yeah,
Yeah, it's probably going to be a slow burn too, I have a feeling, but it'll probably be worth it and good. So yeah, thanks for coming on, and it was great talking to you. If you ever want to come back on, let me know, and then I'll like post your links and everything, and I'll let you know when it's up.
sweet, awesome. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate
All
it.
right, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for
Bye.
listening, guys. Bye.